The Golden Triangle. The name itself, it has a certain allure, doesn't it?
It really does. Conjures up all sorts of images.
But beneath that intriguing title, well, there's a complex and pretty significant history. Let's get straight to the geography first.
Okay. So we're talking about a meeting point of three nations. It's a rugged, mountainous area.
How big are we talking?
Spanning roughly 200,000 square kilometers. Think northeastern Myanmar, northwestern Thailand, and northern Laos.
Right, and the center point.
It's focused around the confluence of the Ruak and Mekong rivers. That's kind of the epicenter. Coordinates are about 20 degrees north, 100 degrees east.
Now, the name itself, Golden Triangle, it sounds old, historic.
You'd think so, but actually no. It's surprisingly recent. It was coined back in 1971.
Really? By who?
By a U.S. State Department official, Marshall Green. It was during a press conference specifically about, well, the opium trade.
Ah, so the name came directly from its association with opium.
Exactly. It was a label that just stuck, captured the region's notoriety right away.
And it was a fitting one, absolutely, given its history. Since the 1950s, this area was, for a long time, the world's main source of opium.
Yeah, the raw stuff for most of the world's heroin. But, you know, the map of illicit trade, it's always shifting.
True. In the early 21st century, we saw Afghanistan really take over as the dominant opium producer.
Right. But then, fast forward to 2023, and there's another huge shift. Myanmar is back on top.
The world's largest opium producer again.
Yep, and that's a direct result of the Taliban cracking down hard on poppy cultivation over in Afghanistan. It just shows how dynamic this whole global trade is.
So, in this deep dive,
Right.
we're definitely not just pointing at a spot on the map.
No, not at all.
We're going to try and explore how this specific region in Southeast Asia became so central to the drug trade.
We'll look at the methods, the processes involved.
And the historical turning points, those shifts in trafficking routes over the decades.
Plus the current situation. Because it's not just about opium anymore, is it? The rise of synthetic drugs is huge.
Exactly. Our goal here is really to understand the key drivers, the main factors at play, without getting completely lost in, overwhelming detail.
Okay, so maybe we should pinpoint the specific areas within those three countries.
Good idea. Where exactly are we talking about?
Well, within Myanmar, the absolute heart of it is Shan State. That's key.
And in Thailand.
Provinces like Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, Mai Hong Son. But it also extends into places like Phai Au, Lampang, Lamphun, Nan, and Phrae.
Okay. And Laos.
In Laos, you're looking at regions like Luang Nampha, Bokeo, Luang Prabang, Udom Se, Phong Sali, Hua Phan, and Shen Kuang.
Wow. Okay, so it's quite a wide area across all three nations.
It really underscores the scale of production historically, yeah.
And understanding the backstory here, I think, really illuminates things. Its rise to prominence wasn't just random.
Not at all. There were specific events, like in the late 1940s when the Chinese Communist Party really consolidated control in Yunnan province, right next door.
They launched a major crackdown on opium there, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. A significant campaign. And that had a ripple effect, basically pushing cultivation south across the border right into the Golden Triangle area.
And this southward push, it happened at the same time as another really crucial event.
The defeat of the Kuomintang, the KMT, in the Chinese Civil War in '49.
Right. Thousands of their troops didn't just disappear.
No, they retreated. They crossed into Burma, which, had a pretty weak central government at the time.
And they didn't just pass through?
No. They essentially seized control of the border regions. And critically, they took control of the opium production that was already starting to move there.
Initially moving it south into Thailand.
A lot of it, yeah.
Yeah.
But the KMT didn't just sort of passively occupy the territory. They actively shaped the trade.
How so?
Well, they implemented policies that really tightened their grip. By the early 1950s, Communist China had pretty much wiped out opium in Yunnan,
leaving the KMT in
effectively a monopoly position in the Shan State. And their rule, well, it had a massive impact on the local population.
Yeah, I read about that. Coercion of villagers.
Absolutely. Documented accounts. They demanded resources, food, manpower, money, everything. And they slapped heavy taxes on the opium farmers.
Which you'd think might reduce production, but
counterintuitively, no. It forced farmers to grow more opium just to meet the tax demands and survive, so it actually fueled the trade.
There was that disturbing account from an American missionary, too.
Yeah, witnessing the KMT torturing the Lahu people for failing to comply with their rules. It was brutal.
And the numbers really show this shift, don't they, the production figures?
Oh, dramatically. Around the time of Burmese independence, maybe 30 tons of opium a year in the region.
And by the mid-50s,
Mm-hmm.
after the KMT arrived and set up shop,
It exploded up to 600 tons.
wow, a 20-fold increase in just a few years. That's staggering. It really shows the impact of their control.
So yeah, just to kind of recap the timeline, Myanmar's been a big player in this whole transnational drug trade for a long, long time, since World War II, really.
And like we said, right now, today, it's the world's largest producer of illicit opium again.
Which brings us to logistics.
Yeah.
Moving this stuff, the raw opium and then the heroin base, it's complex.
Okay, so paint the picture. How does it move from, say, northeastern Myanmar?
Well, traditionally, and surprisingly still common, it's by caravans, horses and donkeys.
Really, still?
Yeah. Carrying the opium or the early-stage heroin base to these makeshift refineries, often located along the rugged Thai-Burma border.
And that's where the conversion to heroin happens.
Well, the first stage, converting opium to a heroin base. Then from there, the refined product gets smuggled, usually into towns in North Thailand.
And then down to Bangkok.
Down to Bangkok, and then out to international markets. That's the typical route.
What kind of scale are we talking about cultivation-wise? Any estimates?
Back in 2005, the UNODC, that's the UN Drugs and Crime Office, they estimated opium cultivation covered a massive 430 square kilometers just within Myanmar.
430 square kilometers. That's huge.
It gives you a sense of the scale, definitely.
Now, there have been attempts to stop this, obviously. Kun Sa, the drug lord. His surrender in 96 was a big deal, wasn't it?
It was highly publicized, yeah. His Hmong Thai army surrendered. It was presented as this major breakthrough.
Right.
But the underlying issues, they've proven remarkably stubborn. There's been a continued lack of really comprehensive government action against other major trafficking groups.
And the money laundering problem just persists.
Exactly. Those factors really hinder any long-term progress. And it's crucial we don't forget the human side.
The farmers.
Yeah, many of the ethnic groups in Myanmar and the Thai highlands growing poppies, they live below the poverty line. Often trapped, few other options.
The economic power of this trade is just hard to grasp sometimes.
Yeah.
Back in 96, the U.S. Embassy in Rangoon had an estimate.
I remember this. Opium exports alone
Were worth roughly the same as all of Myanmar's legal exports combined.
Let that sink in. The scale is unbelievable. And that money wasn't just disappearing.
No, it was being plowed back into the country, fueling infrastructure, building hotels.
Which leads us straight into the whole murky world of money laundering. There's that big 4-year investigation involving MOGE.
Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise.
Right. It was alleged to be a key channel for laundering heroin profits, reportedly controlled by the Myanmar army.
And there was that deal with Toll, the French oil giant, and Unocal later joined in 92.
Yep. MOGE got a $15 million payment. But here's the thing.
MOG itself didn't seem to have any real assets or profits of its own.
Exactly, yet hundreds of millions of U.S. dollars were flowing through their bank accounts in Singapore.
Investigators found links.
Direct links.
Evidence in confidential MOGE files. Over $60 million linked straight back to Kun Sa, the drug lord.
So the conclusion was?
Essentially, that drug money was underpinning a huge chunk of Myanmar's economy, and foreign partnerships were, maybe inadvertently, providing a sort of cover for it.
And those reports about banks in Rangoon offering laundering services for a 40% commission.
Astounding, isn't it? A 40% cut. Just shows how ingrained it was. Okay, so to really get a handle on this, maybe we should walk through the actual process. From the poppy flower to heroin.
Yeah, understanding the transformation is key. The cycle for the farmers, it usually starts around September, end of the rainy season.
They plant the poppies then.
Right. Often about half a hectare, maybe 50,000 plants. Then harvesting kicks off in February once the plants are mature.
Describe that harvest process. It's quite specific, isn't it?
It is. About 2 weeks after the petals fall off and the seed pod swells up, the farmer takes a special tool. It's got multiple small blades.
And they score the pod.
Makes shallow diagonal cuts, usually late afternoon. This lets the raw opium, this milky latex-like stuff, ooze out overnight.
Then they collect it in the morning.
Carefully scrape it off each pod with curved tool, collect it. They can repeat this tapping a few times until the pod's exhausted.
And the yield from that half-hectare field.
Typically somewhere between 4 and 8 kilograms of raw opium.
Okay, raw opium collected. Next step. Morphine. How does that conversion happen?
Well, first, that raw opium has a lot of water, so they dry it in the sun for days, reduces weight, increases value. Then it's often pressed into blocks for sale.
To traders.
Yeah.
And then to make morphine.
they take large amounts of this raw opium, dissolve it in boiling water in big metal drums, skim off any plant bits.
Then chemicals come in.
Right. Add calcium hydroxide. That converts the morphine into a water-soluble form. Let it cool, filter it, reheat it.
Add something else.
Ammonium chloride. That adjusts the pH, the acidity. Over a few hours, the morphine base starts to precipitate out, settles at the bottom.
Then filter again.
Filter, dry it in the sun. You end up with this crude, sort of coffee-colored morphine base.
Still on heroin, though.
Not yet. This base is then dissolved in hydrochloric acid, boiled, filtered multiple times, and then pressed into bricks. Easier to transport to the heroin labs.
Okay, so we've got morphine-based bricks. Now for the final stage heroin. Walk us through that refining.
Right. Those morphine hydrochloride bricks get crushed into powder, then mixed with acetic anhydride, that's a really key chemical here.
And heated.
Gently, for about 2 hours. This reaction creates diacetylmorphine, which is basically heroin, but impure at this stage.
How do they purify it?
Add water and activated charcoal, stir it up, filter it. Then add a solution of sodium carbonate in hot water, slowly.
And that makes the heroin precipitate.
Exactly. The heroin base comes out of the liquid. Filter that out, dry it in a steam bath. From, say, 450 grams of morphine, you might get about 310 grams of crude heroin base.
And this base can be refined further into different grades.
Right. You hear about heroin number 3 and number 4?
What's the difference?
Number 3 is lower purity, maybe less than 40%, mostly for local use, often smoked. They just mix the crude base with more hydrochloric acid, add fillers, adulterants like caffeine, quinine, gives you dark brown lumps.
And number 4? That's the export grade.
That's the high purity stuff, often over 80%. For export, usually intravenous use, the process is more involved.
How so?
Mix the crude base with water, more acetic anhydride, add some chloroform that helps separate out impurities that sink, take the middle layer, purify it more with charcoal.
Precipitate it again.
Add sodium carbonate again. Filter, dry it into a very fine white powder, then usually pressed into blocks, maybe 350 grams for the traffickers.
It's just incredible seeing the value jump at each stage. That 1992 U.S. Department of Justice report?
Yeah, it laid it out starkly. Raw opium in Shan State, $120 to $200 a kilo.
Morphine base at the Thai-Burma border?
Jumps to maybe $1,000 a kilo.
Heroin base in Chiang Rai, Thailand.
Could be $3,500 to $4,400.
And then street level in the U.S.
That same kilo, depending on purity and where it is in the chain, anywhere from $100,000 up to $1 million.
The profit margins are just astronomical.
Absolutely staggering. And those profits, of course, that's what drove the expansion, the search for new routes, new ways to get it to market. The 1970s were a really big period of change for that.
Yeah, the whole Frank Lucas story, the direct connection, it's almost mythical.
It's a fascinating example of adapting the trade. Lucas, this American drug lord, he saw U.S. soldiers in Vietnam getting hooked on Thai heroin.
So we went straight to the source.
Traveled to Bangkok with Ike Atkinson. They basically cut out the traditional New York mafia middlemen.
Wow.
By setting up a direct supply of high-purity heroin from remnants of the KMT in the Golden Triangle. He was paying maybe $4,200 a kilo?
Compared to?
$50,000 the mafia was charging back then? Huge difference.
And Atkinson used his military contacts.
To smuggle it back to the U.S. on Air Force planes, this super pure heroin hit Harlem, cut and sold for enormous profit, until Lucas got busted in '75.
And right around that same time, the existing European routes, the famous French connection.
They got disrupted, 1972. Turkey, under a lot of international pressure, banned opium poppy cultivation.
Creating a huge gap in the market.
Exactly. And that opened the door wide for Southeast Asian heroin to flood into Europe and the U.S.
And Hong Kong stepped up.
Massively. It already had the triad networks, the busy port, Kai Tak Airport. It became a perfect transit point.
And a money laundering hub, too.
Convenient for that as well. Groups like Ma Sik-chun's syndicate, they were estimated to have brought hundreds of tons of opium into Hong Kong, processing it there into refined heroin for shipping out.
We also saw new groups emerge, like the Akong.
Yeah, a Singaporean Chinese gang. They really took control of the European heroin trade in the mid-70s.
How did they operate?
Led by Roland Tan. Mostly used couriers flying from Thailand and Malaysia straight into Amsterdam. Amsterdam became their European hub.
Effective.
Very. They even started muscling in on traditional triad territories in Europe. Initially, though, SE Asian heroin hitting the U.S. was often just individual couriers on commercial flights.
Transiting through places like Singapore. despite the strict laws there.
Yep. Main entry points were California and Hawaii. Smaller amounts got to NYC, D.C.
And there was that unintended consequence of Asian traffickers getting locked up in U.S. prisons in the 70s.
Right. It created connections, Asian prisoners meeting American prisoners.
Giving the traffickers contacts.
Exactly. Access to existing U.S. gangs and criminal networks for street-level distribution once the heroin got into the country.
Okay, let's move into the 1980s. The dynamics shifted again, didn't they?
They did. The traditional American mafia's power was definitely weakening.
And who filled the gap?
Ethnic Chinese traffickers. They increasingly started to dominate the heroin supply, especially on the U.S. East Coast.
Is there data to back that up?
Yeah, the DEA did a study mid-80s, showed a huge surge of Southeast Asian heroin in New York. Jumped from just 3% of the market supply to over 40% in only 5 years.
Wow, that's a massive increase. And that demand led to
shipping much bigger quantities, moving away from just couriers to concealing large amounts of high-purity heroin inside legitimate cargo shipments.
And we saw some absolutely massive seizures back then, that Bangkok bust in '88.
Incredible. Over a ton of heroin found hidden in rubber sheets on a freighter heading to New York. Biggest single heroin seizure in the world at that time. Street value estimated at $2 billion.
Billion with a B. And then just a year later, in New York itself.
Another record. FBI found 380 kilos of high-grade stuff stuffed inside lawnmower tires. Thought to have come from Hong Kong.
Then Hong Kong, late '89.
Authorities there grabbed 420 kilos packed into what looked like ordinary travel bags.
And it kept going into the early '90s.
Yep. Hayward, California, 91. A massive 545-kilo haul came from Thailand via Taiwan, hidden cleverly inside boxes of plastic bags.
These huge busts really show the scale and the ingenuity, I guess, of the traffickers then.
Absolutely. The stakes were enormous.
So by the 1990s, another new group started making waves in the international heroin trade.
West African criminal organizations, particularly Nigerians.
Right. Nigeria had been a transit point before, but now.
By the early 90s, Nigerian groups themselves became major traffickers, moving Southeast Asian heroin into both Europe and the U.S.
How significant was it?
Very. Hundreds of West Africans were arrested in the U.S. just in 1991 on heroin trafficking charges. It got so bad the Nigerian government actually started requiring citizens to get a drug clearance certificate just to apply for a visa to Thailand.
Wow. And their methods were different from the Asian groups.
Yeah, they shifted tactics. Instead of those huge single shipments the Asians were trying.
They used lots of smaller couriers.
Exactly. Recruited numerous low-level couriers, often not even Nigerian nationals. They'd carry smaller amounts, maybe a couple of kilos each.
On regular flights?
Regular commercial airlines, flying from Asian hubs like Singapore to Europe and the U.S.
Then what happened once it arrived?
Taken to clandestine cutting and packaging mills. Diluted, bulked out, prepped for street sale.
And the profits laundered.
Through various channels, often back in Lagos or through Hong Kong.
And law enforcement noticed this shift.
Oh, yeah. Big DEA investigations targeting these Nigerian networks, like one in '91, busted dozens in the eastern U.S. A huge ring using Singapore as a key transit point.
And that Johannes Sandam case in Singapore was quite high profile, too.
Caught with a lot of heroin hidden in his suitcase, it highlighted those routes. Plus, there was a big Chicago-based Nigerian group supplying heroin across the U.S. Midwest.
Okay, so that brings us more towards the present day. We've seen a big drop in opium cultivation in the traditional Golden Triangle areas, right?
A significant decline, yeah. Those aggressive eradication campaigns, especially between '98 and 2006, they cut cultivation by over 80%.
But that didn't mean the end of the drug trade there.
Not at all. The focus just shifted. Dramatically.
Synthetic drugs.
Exactly. The Golden Triangle and Shan State in Myanmar in particular is now a leading global center for producing synthetic drugs, especially methamphetamine.
Both yaba tablets and crystal meth.
Yep. And it's being exported far and wide. Australia, New Zealand, all over East and Southeast Asia.
And there's a major player behind a lot of this Sam Gore syndicate.
A critical player. The company, basically. It's a huge, highly organized network. Mostly Cantonese Chinese members, links to various triads. Believed to be headed by the shadowy figure Tse Chilap. Their market share is estimated to be enormous, possibly controlling as much as 40% of the entire Asia-Pacific meth market. And they're into heroin and ketamine, too, operating across loads of countries.
There's also that historical link with the Panthay people.
Yes, the Panthay, a Chinese Muslim group with deep roots in the region. They were significantly involved in the earlier opium trade in Burma. Even assisted Khun Sa set up key routes going out through South China.
Okay, but despite that earlier drop in poppy growing, opium production in Myanmar has surged back recently.
It has, concerningly. In 2023, like we mentioned, Myanmar overtook Afghanistan again, became the world's top opium producer.
Estimated output over 1,000 metric tons.
Yeah, largely because the Taliban ban in Afghanistan created that supply vacuum. Plus, reports suggest opium yields in Myanmar actually increased.
Better farming techniques.
Seems so. More efficient farming. And farmers were apparently getting higher prices for the raw opium, too.
What about the latest figures? Any updates?
Well, a UNODC report from early 2024 showed a slight decrease, maybe 8%, in Myanmar's production, but
Still number one.
still the world's leading producer by a significant margin. Yields and prices might have dipped slightly, but we're still talking about a huge amount of heroin potential being exported, worth hundreds of millions, maybe over $1 billion US.
But the dominant story now is meth, isn't it?
Overwhelmingly. Shan State is widely thought to be the biggest meth-producing area on the planet, and production seems to be consolidating in the lower Mekong region.
We're seeing record seizures all over Asia.
Absolutely. East and Southeast Asia, record meth busts constantly. That huge operation by Myanmar authorities in Shan State back in 2020.
What do they find?
Unbelievable quantities.
Yeah.
Millions of meth tablets, tons of crystal meth, heroin too, but also vast amounts of the precursor chemicals needed for synthetics, plus sophisticated manufacturing gear. It just laid bare the industrial scale of this synthetic drug trade now.
So wrapping this up, it's clear the Golden Triangle has gone through this incredible or maybe notorious transformation.
Definitely. From its origins as a key opium zone to becoming the world's main heroin source for decades.
And now, while still a major opium player, it's fundamentally shifted. It's become this dominant hub for synthetic drugs, especially meth.
And that whole evolution, it's been driven by this really complex mix of things, political shifts, regional and global.
Economic pressures, new opportunities.
And the sheer adaptability of these highly organized criminal groups, they just keep evolving.
And the impact is global. From the heroin epidemics of the past
to the ongoing, very serious challenges from meth trafficking across Asia and way beyond today.
It really does leave you wondering, after decades of international efforts trying to tackle drug production and trafficking in the Golden Triangle.
And yet it persists, it adapts, it shifts.
What kind of fundamental change in approach might actually be needed to effectively address this incredibly complex, persistent issue going forward?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? A really profound thing to think about.